Hi everybody, welcome to my session today. My name is Dave de Kloeze and I work as a digital consultant at Emakina and I'm based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. My title today of the session is A Small Step in Marketing Automation, a Big Step for Your Experience. That counts for both the editor as well as the website visitor, where some small automation step hopefully makes your life a lot easier. But before we start, a little note, the recording on the slides will be shared at a later point in time, it was promised. Also, a little disclaimer, I also talk a little bit about GDPR and such. I have no legal background, so in case you want to do anything with regards to GDPR or personal data, make sure to discuss it with your own legal department or your data protection officer in case you have one. If there are any questions, I believe there is a session later where you can ask me anything, or at the end I'll share my details, how you can get in contact with me. So today's agenda. First, I'll start off with a little introduction. I tell a little bit about me and what I've been doing so far. Then we'll discuss some of the marketing automation features and move over there to the GDPR section, little recap, and we'll move on that. Some tips about implementing marketing automation, things to think about, and things you should not forget. Then a little bit about how to sell, mainly aimed for if you have a project or a client that would like to start with it, things you should think of and how you can convince them or help them setting things up. At the end, we also have two real-world examples. Two clients allowed me to share some of their things they've implemented, just to showcase how one bigger and a smaller setup can help and how it helped them. Then a little slide about how I see the future of both automation and a little bit about personalization, and we'll close it off with some takeaways, and that's it. So, as I already told you, I work at Emakina. I started working with Kentico about 2011. And since then, I've done over 200 projects. I've been a Kentico Xperience MVP for the past 5 years, with a lot of love, of course. Marketing automation, I've been intrigued about it quite some time, and in the past year, I've given over 10 trainings, both to developers as well as to end clients, and helping them setting things up or configuring things or solving issues. I have over 27 Kentico versions installed, although I must say that includes a few betas and alpha versions, but still. I've attended over 23 official Kentico events. I'm not sure if I counted this one, and although it's virtual, I think I attended one, of course. And I'm also very active in the DevNet community. Currently, I'm ranked third, or although I'm not sure what it's now, but somewhere around that lines. And I'm always happy to talk to you about Kentico. Marketing automation. Of course, there's quite some elements and modules inside the Xperience platform, but I'd like to highlight a few which I think are worth a little bit more insight. So one of the key things I think, of course, are the marketing automation flows. This is where all the magic happens, where you set things up and make sure that all the actions and things happen. I think that should always get a little bit more attention, of course. That doesn't have any visual output to the website itself. Next off is the scoring module. I like to see scoring a lot like making sure that you categorize or group certain contacts based on their activities, and it makes it a lot easier to find and combine a lot of the information. Instead of doing that on the spot, it will go over time. It can also cause as a trigger for your marketing automation, of course. Cookies, they're not a marketing automation feature by itself, but in case you rely on cookies to make sure that you figure out which contact you currently have visiting your website, you should also think about how you set those up and how to handle in case someone hasn't accepted cookies, but we'll talk a little bit about it later more. Consent checking. I'll get back to you about the GDPR part, but I think you should always make sure that you consider that although you have things like opt into newsletters and such, or even opt out, of course, checking consent should be done at any of these steps when you want to use the data or actively reach out to your contacts. I also already mentioned opt-out. You should know that opting out is something different than not giving consent. Same goes for full opt-out. Good thing to know is already that when you, as an end user, do a full opt-out in, for instance, a newsletter or an email, you will also, even if you are already active in marketing automation flows, you will no longer receive any non-system emails. So things like forget password, of course, will still happen, but all other emails will not be sent to you anymore. And that has, of course, nothing to do with consent itself. Also, anonymous, in case you don't have all data yet, or in case someone hasn't accepted cookies, you should take into account that someone can still be anonymous, although that already the system starts collecting data about him. It can be that he visited a certain landing page, it can be that he done certain activities from form submissions without providing things like names and such. And of course, campaigns, where it all comes together in case you want to have a separate goal or a separate section and combine both marketing automation campaigns as well as reaching certain conversion rates and such. So before you can use contacts, of course, you need their information, and the contact management, of course, can be coming. The data can get from different sources. Most common is, of course, the forms. One thing to keep in mind is that make sure that you check and keep checking if form fields are met. Also, if you select the setting to update a contact in case the data doesn't match. Depending on the type of form, I can imagine that you would want to override things because you know they're more accurate or maybe they've updated. For instance, if you have a live event where people need to register for, the chances of them providing correct data is much higher than when you have download of a white paper. The question is if you even need a name for that. Things like that you should take into account and keep monitoring, especially with mapping those fields at a later state might be a bit hard as you're no longer sure what point in time this form is set and if it should override things. Also, when you have any custom data, that can be just both custom elements, so a new field you add to a contact, as well as custom elements you track on the website. Make sure that you map those into the data protection module. We'll cover it, the module itself later, but also make sure that you track them, as it's very hard at a later point in time to figure out which fields and which items you are tracking and storing of a contact at a later point. Cookies, as already mentioned, make sure that in case you are depending on cookies for your form submissions or for your contact mapping your contact, that it could be that someone hasn't accepted cookies or throws them away. And it can happen that someone on the same machine, that even the same person, gets tracked into your system multiple times because of these types of actions. And you need to make sure that you have certain measures to counter that. Also, when you import users, because quite often you have, of course, contact data in either a different system or a different source, or you had an offline event in which you want to import the data from. Make sure that the data is fully, so that you don't get half-baked data, although we already know that sometimes data could be missing. And make sure that you properly register consent, and if you don't, that the next time that person actually visit the website, that you can check or ask for their consent on certain elements. That's just how it should. Then we have the conversion and cleanup of anonymous data, anonymous users mainly. Everything is tracked by the system, but make sure that if you no longer have any activity, or it's just someone you can't work with because you need more things, you need a certain data on them, and you're still not having them after X amount of time, that you clean it up, because there is a lot of things that can be tracked, and you want to just keep your system fresh. That can just be a yearly thing, but it depends, of course, a bit on the amount of users you're getting and activities. Also, contact groups is something you should keep into account, that you start with it as soon as possible from a marketeer perspective, or editor, depending on who's managing it. Because I think it's a good way of grouping contacts. It's also in the name, of course, but it's something that you would want to do on the go, because you have a certain type or category in which you think those users can map. And it's something you want to do on the spot, and not something you want to do at a later point. You can also then use them in your scoring rules, or in your marketing automation later, or a way of identifying the group. Also, what I quite often see is that marketers want to validate whoever's in a contact group. So if you set those groups up, the sooner, the more time you have to validate if they're actually working correctly. So now you have all the contact data and you have everything set up. Then GDPR, which is a little recap here. It went into effect the 25th of May in 2018 already. And one of the key elements I think we should always consider is, amongst things, these rights and the latest one. You have the right of access, basically allowing everyone to access their own data. Right of migration, getting an export and human readable format of your data the site is collecting, and giving you that data so you can even import it in your own system or a different system. And the right to be forgotten, of course, in case you no longer want to be part of the website, and make sure that you have the option for someone to be forgotten. And something you should start off when doing any implementation involving user data is limit the way, and not even the way, the what is stored and for how long. Would you need all the person's data for just a simple white paper download? Would you need to keep it for more than a year? And it's very hard to keep track of those things at a later point in time. So that was something I recommend to think of as soon as you set up the site, so you have either something in place to identify which data is stored and when it started storing and how long you should be storing it, or that can also be something offline. So then some tips on how to do your implementation itself and things to take into account. I see them more as a bit of points of attention when you are working with marketing automation. Add a macro. It might sound simple. The macros in the system are available throughout the whole system and all modules. And it's very easy to add your own macro. So in case you have something specific, you'll see it later in our first client case. You have a specific field on your contact, or you have a certain activity you want to measure or something like that. It's very easy to add a macro, which then can easily be used in all other parts, and it can be as a trigger, it can be as a part of a check in your marketing flow, add it to your marketing email. It's very easy to do, and it will help editors and marketers a lot in their daily work, and it's easy to set up and manage. Also tools, and with that I mean make sure that the right tools are implemented for managing and checking the data. Both for the website visitor, they should have the correct tools to view and manage their own data, but also for the editor or marketer to check which data do we have available, how long do we have it, and when have people given consent, where are people in certain flows. A lot of these things are also available in the system, but it's quite easy to create, for instance, a custom module in case you have a lot of custom things, and combine a lot of these tools together, just to make everyone's life easier. In case you enrich contact management, and you do it with all the different sources, make sure that everything is tied to it correctly, just to make sure that you can use it. Because if you want at a later point in time move all the data towards the contacts, it's getting too late. So with that, I mean, setting up forms is something you would want to do with map the contacts, have certain activities, have created a specific widget where someone can do a certain activity, download something or whatever, and make sure that you tie it to the marketing contacts activity. And everything you do, start with it from the beginning. As soon as you start development, would I want to track this type of activity? Would it make any sense? Should there be any activity? Should it be any trigger at a later point? Scoring. You could use scoring for something completely different, like using GDPR. I already said in a previous slide, like you should track how long someone has someone has was active on the website, has done any activities. You need to clean them up. You could just as well use a scoring rule where you say, has someone done any activity in the past year? And if not, give them a point, and everyone that validates for that point is a candidate for being cleaned up at that point. And you can still do your own check if that's still needed, or if you want to use someone like that. That's something I personally fond of using. Also reporting. There's a lot of reports by default in the system, but it's quite easy to extend it and create your own modules where you can even combine data and combine all the flows. It's very easy to then, as a marketeer, subscribe to those reports and get automated emails every week or so without even needing to log into the system, just helping you to easily create an overview of what's happening. Testing, it may sound like a no-brainer, but test as much as possible and test with correct data. And that's also for the person's data, as well as things like personalization in email. You wouldn't be the first to figure out that when the actual data goes live, that real clients have different names, and that can be both in length, that can be in missing fields. Maybe someone doesn't have the required field set for all the last name fields, and in case you want to do some personalization on that, make sure that you test the emails and test the flows. And I can't do that and search out that enough. So you've implemented everything, and you now want to sell. You've implemented the whole website, and now you want to sell or convince the client on allowing them to set up marketing automation. Hopefully you already thought about it in a sooner step in the project, but quite often things are under deadlines and stress, and at the end it's like, okay, now turn this marketing automation thing on. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Things you should take into account is that it just it requires a lot of data and interaction between both you as an implementation partner as well as the marketeers on setting things up. Things on how to sell them will be give an example case, and an example case that is relevant to them. May sound obvious, but there's a lot of dancing goats like demos and samples. But if you use their own project, their own specific client data, it gives them ideas. It sparks something in them, like, oh, we can use this. Also, what I like to do is give a training, and that training can be of everything that is possible with the system, and preferably you do it on their project in a demo environment or whatever, just to show them what's possible and immediately be able to act upon all the data and act upon any wild ideas they get during such a session. In case the project is already running and live, you can already start looking into what data is already collected in the system and show that it's useful by, depending on, of course, the goals of the client or such, show them what you can already achieve from just viewing the data and giving them certain options, grouping data, and maybe giving them ideas on how to react on them. But this is something that is very specific to every client, and it's very hard to reproduce the same logic from client A to client B, and even within projects for the same client, it might be hard. So just show them their own site, basically. Moving on to our first real-world example. In this case, it's for our client Konica Minolta. They're a large print and IT solutions vendor in Europe. They have multiple sites, and it's a multi-instance environment. Basically, they have different sites on their on the different countries within Europe. For them, we had a few sessions. One of them, which was a training session, and of which we got a number of goals. As I said, they had a specific logic for double opt-in, which is a bit further than the default confirmation email. Like when you subscribe to a newsletter or something, you usually quite often get a confirmation you've now subscribed. They have active double opt-in, which means that as soon as someone subscribes to anything, the system checks if you have already accepted double opt-in. If not, you first get an email in which contains a link where you actively have to agree upon receiving email, which is just an additional step and has in fact nothing to do with even allowing marketing emails or giving consent. It's a different step in the beginning of basically everything. So we had to handle those as well as in the marketing automation flows and such. Secondly, we had the request for they have multiple nurture streams which they would like to provide and basically target and divide people into the different streams to give them more options and eventually, of course, diverse them into the sales streams. They wanted to personalize emails, and that was not that heavy, but it was, of course, with a personal greeting and such. And depending on whatever they were doing, you got a different email. And they wanted insights in what was happening. As I said, the system contained multiple sites, and they had one main instance where they created these items, created the marketing automation flows and such. And they wanted to spread it out over the different sites and basically get some feedback without needing to log into every different instance. So what we did for them was we implemented, of course, the double opt-in. We created a different custom macro, as I mentioned before, which could check everywhere in the system if the current contact has already actively accepted double opt-in. And if not, usually we didn't do anything at that point and had to wait for them to actively accept it. We implemented a bunch of scoring rules for them because they basically want to track a certain level to which they divide them into the different nurture streams. And if they reach a certain point, they would be moved to the CRM and handled by different sales people. And we set up, of course, their email marketing with a lot of custom emails and help them set them up and personalize those. So Konica allowed me to share this. This is an active overview of all the scoring rules and the points divided for a certain stream. As you can see, there's quite a lot of different values in when you get points. At the bottom, you see the deduction even if you unsubscribe for a certain stream. This is something you can copy paste, but it's very specific to the type of people you have visiting your website, how many activities they do. As said, this was just as an example and was spread out over the multiple instances, and per instance they already have a different setup for this, as they want to certain regions people tend to download less ebooks or fill out forms more or even visit a lot more websites, web pages before doing something. And this is something you have to actively set up with your marketeer and together come up with this list and basically tweak it along the way. This point system was used in this marketing automation flow. You can't read it, which is a bit on purpose, as they didn't want to share everything, of course. And this is basically a check through the system for all the different streams. As you can see with the green blocks, there's numbers of different ends, which basically allowed you to go into certain areas, or it checks if you have read or received certain newsletters. If you had and you acted upon them, you move to a different level, or they, if you didn't, they send out one additional reminder or such, or a follow-up on that section and move along that line. although it might look a bit complex, it's basically repeating itself in the different flows. But it is something you have to maintain and keep an eye on how things are going. For this project, we had a few learnings, of course. One was the anonymous user. Although we assumed that everyone was there, things that we luckily found in time was that it happens that people don't have all their data entered. So it could be that either a form wasn't mapped, a form field, or that people just didn't enter it because they only subscribed to a newsletter where it wasn't required or such. As well as that we had data coming in from external systems where it was possible that either data couldn't be mapped or that there was missing data. Make sure that wherever you're using personal data that you assume it's not there or invalid. That's basically what I would suggest. You can have everything in place, but it's still possible that someone removed something, updated something, or that it's just plain invalid. And make sure that you check that when personalizing an email or such. We have a lot of complex MA steps. Luckily, we were able to create a few helpers and macros to support the client in this. But it tends to get complex for them, and if you haven't set up such macros or helpers, it might get people get a bit lost. We had contexts that became stuck. Basically, we had things like a yes/no condition question where we assumed that it's always one or the two, but it happened that certain people didn't have any data in the field, or that there was an exceptional scenario because of missing data and such. Where someone got stuck in this, and we wanted to make sure you should make sure that you validate and check what people are doing in certain marketing automation flows, so that you can act upon them, because the system always finds a way, or basically website visitors always find a way to break things. Moving on to our second real-world example. This company didn't want to disclose its name, but did want to share some of the data. They're a big company that develops X-ray and CT systems for industrial use. So things like checking welds on pipes, or supporting measurements in research fields. They had a big product launch, and they wanted our help in doing a few things. One was targeting the correct audience, where they basically exclude competition, but also find people that might be interested in it. They already had a lot of data running, but they had needed our help in setting this up. And they wanted to group contacts based on the results. And the results were, did they get the invite and read it, but not attend the event, or did they attend it shortly, or such things. And that was our goal. What we set up for them is, of course, the email marketing campaign where all the different emails went out. Good to know that it was different events had different editions and were in multiple languages, so we had to spread those out. We created some scoring rules for them, and of course, we set up the marketing automation flow, which is a bit smaller than our previous one. Also, we set up a campaign. Basically to combine all the data and get some nice overview. So this is an example of the scoring we used to basically find out all contacts which basically did anything in the past year, or basically past 2 years on the website, and they needed to have an email. As you can see here, we basically excluded someone when their email was a máquina, as we want to exclude our own, and if they didn't have a name. But basically anything else would give you points. But we didn't make them recurring, as you can see in the fourth column. So you just got a hit or not if you didn't have done anything. This was the trigger on the marketing automation flow. As you can see in the middle, basically if you've done anything to reach 1001 points, you would be allowed into this marketing automation flow, which basically comes down to you've visited a page and have an email. Also, we had a few conditions on checking if someone was from an English-speaking country or not. The other way around, but and if they reached certain contact groups, those were set up basically on your landing page in the website. This is the marketing automation flow we've set up. As you can see here, it's not as complex as the previous one, and it contains a few loops. Basically, before the event, you got an invite email, and we wanted to make sure that you got a reminder and filter out anyone that has registered for the event itself. We have different checks, as you can see in the middle, which is basically the core element of the logic. If you filled it out and check if you signed up anonymous, which basically means if you haven't accepted cookies or your contact, or you registered through your mobile phone, while you get all your email through a different through a desktop. We wanted to track that as well. And on top, we exclude the competition by giving them a different status. So what did we learn from this specific project? Again, test emails and flows. We had a lot of missing data and people with odd behavior in their emails. It can be just because the data was from a different source, or that there was elements missing. Make sure that you test it properly. Luckily, we figured everything out in time. Again, complex MA steps where we supported them with creating a custom macro or custom checks. In this case, was it for the competitor check? We had a custom table where a list of competitor email addresses domains was stored, which would filter them out. We had contacts stuck in the marketing automation flow, basically because they had null values in certain areas. So we wanted to check if someone was from a German-speaking country. And if not, you would do something else. But there were people which had a null value there, basically because they probably were imported or such. And that was not a valid case in that scenario. And we had the not threat action. We solved that with the check if someone registered with his personal email or with his email, but not registered it as an action for that specific contact. So we have additional checks. And because we did that basically because we wanted to know what happens with the contact and if they signed up and attended the event itself. So the future, looking at the time, I'll keep it short. Basically, how I envision this is that I'll see a lot more personalization, and it can be very micro level. So as soon as you hit the website, I think you already get some personalization and even automation at that point without even knowing anything about the user. And for the user side, I think you'll get a lot more insights in both your data as well as the behavior you do on the website. And that can happen with things like machine learning and such on a very small scale. So a few takeaways from my session. Make sure your consent management is super easy for both the editor and the visitor to manage and check it, so that you can use it throughout the rest of the system. Combine GDPR checks in your personalization as well. Make sure to check them as it's easy to do right from the beginning. Prepare for anonymous automation. So based on whatever you're doing, it could happen that someone is actually anonymous for whatever reason. Plan from the beginning when you start a project with think about marketing automation. It could be that it's a project for next year or whatever, but think about things you want to implement so you can create custom activities or start creating the points where you want to log things. At that point, already include all teams, not just the marketing department or whatever, but make sure that you check everyone from the client side, as there's always someone that might have a different opinion or a different check on things and or a different source of data that they want to include. Test a lot. Test the flows, test the emails, and maybe even combine it with reporting. Check how things happen, check if things are read, check how they look in different email clients and such, and create your custom reports on people in marketing automation flows, as well as the marketing emails being sent. So you get an easy overview for the results of everything. That was my session. In case you want to reach out to me, you can do that on Twitter, on DevNet, or on the community Slack, and maybe at a later point. Thanks everyone for joining.